And would you like to conduct the roll?
Okay. Okay. First, I would also like to introduce Tatiana Ostrand, who is here in place of Rex Jackman. So,
Okay.
Directors, Larry Stransky.
Yes.
Richie Wasserman.
Here.
Mike Chimolino.
Here.
Susan Ranachek.
Here.
Georgianne Krosky.
Here.
And Chair Jurdy.
Here. Okay. First thing on our agenda is a public hearing, adoption of Resolution M 2018, adopting the 2018 Mendocino County Regional Housing Need Plan.
Okay. So the first thing we need to do on this item is make a finding of proper notice. I have the proof of publication. It's actually a 60-day notice requirement. So this was published on both the June 17th and 19th in the Ukiah Daily Journal. Yeah, so if somebody wants to make finding of proper notice.
Okay. Sometimes you bring up a
You want
copy.
that?
Just one of us could see it. Okay, thanks.
All right, I'll make notice of proper finding.
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, well, thanks.
Okay. So the regional housing needs assessment is a process that we have been conducting every 5 years. With the adoption of this plan, we will now start into an 8-year cycle, which is a little better, but did make planning a little more difficult in this particular plan. So the process begins with the development of a methodology. That methodology is used to guide the allocation of needed housing units among the jurisdictions of the county over the planning period, which in this case was 8.7 years. The total numbers of needed housing units are assigned to us by the California Department of Housing and Community Development, and those numbers are broken into various income levels. So in your staff report, the table on page 2 of your staff report, the totals at the bottom, those are the numbers that have been assigned to us by HCD. The original determination that we received from them was actually significantly higher than this, but I will get into that in just a minute. So as I mentioned, the first step was to develop a methodology. That methodology was adopted by MCOG at the June meeting. It also required a 60-day notice and comment period. It was developed by a committee that was made up of representatives from the planning departments of the cities and county, as well as MCOG. And it can be found in the plan that was in your packet. The methodology statement is on page 7 of that plan. So once the methodology is adopted, then the committee began work on developing an allocation, taking the numbers from HCD and breaking them down by jurisdiction. So there were a number of trial allocations that were considered. All of those trial allocations can be found in your plan. Ultimately, the trial allocation that was approved by the committee was similar to that used in the 2008 RENA plan, which had similar issues to this plan, and so it was considered by the committee to be a better better comparison than the last time we went through this process. That base was then adjusted because there was a feeling that the cities are better able to accommodate housing for low and very low population, which tend to be the higher density. And so some of the allocation for the county in those income categories was shifted to the cities, and then the moderate and above moderate income housing was shifted from the cities to the county. And that is how the committee arrived at the recommended allocation, which can be found on page 9 of the plan. It's the first table on page 9. Now, this draft allocation was included in a notice that went to each of the local agencies, advising them of the proposed allocation and establishing an appeal period, which did close on Friday, August 17th. Following the notice that went out of the proposed allocation, we actually received word from the State Department of Housing and Community Development that was a response to an appeal that we had submitted of the very high regional housing needs determination that we had initially received. You'll notice that in Table 6, the total needed housing units that had been established in that first determination was 3,845. Not surprisingly, MCOG and the local agencies all had some real concerns with the ability to meet that need or even accommodate for development of that many housing units, particularly in this time of fire recovery. Also of note is the age category that the Housing and Community Development and Department of Finance anticipate the highest level of growth in are people over 75. And so there was concern that there also was difficulty in meeting and providing the services, having services available that people of that age category might need. And so with these concerns in mind, an appeal was submitted to HCD, and they did respond to that, which resulted in a reduction of 2,000 units in the regional housing needs determination. The reduction came about primarily because HCD agreed to remove the adjustments that they place on the need. Those are adjustments for overcrowding, which is higher than the state average, or vacancy rates that are lower than the state average. So those adjustments, because both of those are issues that are impacting Mendocino County housing, they had weighed heavily in our original regional housing needs determination. So with the reduction in units, it was straight across, essentially 52% reduction across all income levels. The draft allocation was revised. Each agency's allocation was lowered approximately 52%, and that revised draft allocation was sent to the agencies. That revised allocation, which is in Table 7, also on page 9, you'll see, so I'll just go through that quickly. For Mendocino County, the total allocation is 1,349 housing units. Of that, 291 are very low, 179 are low income, 177 are moderate, and 702 are above moderate. The City of Ukiah's total allocation is 239, 86 being very low, 72 low, 49 moderate, and 32 above moderate. City of Fort Bragg has 137, 60 of those are very low income, 31 low, 23 moderate, and 23 above moderate. City of Willits has 111 housing units, with 34 in the very low income category, 25 in the low income category, 17 moderate, 35 above moderate, and then Point Arena has 9 housing units, with 3 in the very low income category, 1 low, 3 moderate, and 2 above moderate. So those are the allocations that are included in this plan. As I mentioned, the appeal period ended on Friday, and we did not receive any appeals. Also included in this plan, you'll find Appendix A, which is the final determination from Housing and Community Development. It also shows on the last page of that appendix, it shows the age breakdown, which affects our housing needs determination. That's because typically the higher number of older population results in a higher number of housing units, because older populations tend to have fewer people per household. Then Appendix B are the statements of constraints, which have been submitted by our local agencies. You actually have in your handouts today a revised Appendix B. We had revisions from the city of Ukiah, and then the just single sheet by itself that's not attached from City of Point Arena is the last part of that revised Appendix B. So that is my summary of the plan. You have a resolution included in your packet that approves the housing needs allocation and approves the regional housing needs plan. Once approved, the housing allocation will be used by the local agencies in development of their housing element. So that concludes my staff report. So this is a public hearing, so you want to open the public hearing and then take questions?
Sure. So at 1:46, we'll open the public hearing. So do we have any, you want to open up for board questions first, then we'll open up public comments? So
yeah.
are there any questions for clarification on the staff report? Okay, seeing none, we'll go right to public comment.
Members of the council, Nash Gonzalez, Interim Planning Building Services Director. Understand that the appeal period is closed on Friday. We did submit a memorandum to the Executive Director on August 10th that basically indicates that the county is faced with many constraints with being able to address many of the housing needs. And basically our memorandum summarized the water infrastructure, the sewer infrastructure, the allocation in itself, and as far as the coastal zone constraints and so on, and then again flood hazards that we're generally faced with throughout the county. Fire hazards and the recovery as well. And in conclusion, we stated in the memorandum that we would recommend that MCOG re-examine the methodology and allocation, especially with regards to the low and very low income housing units for the unincorporated areas. And so we did follow that up with additional information, and basically our area of concern is the very low and low units, and we're basically asking for a reduction of 2/3 of the allocated numbers. And again, basically this is due to the fact that the county is faced with many of the constraints. The cities who are capable of having infrastructure such as sewer and water are able to accommodate higher densities than the county. We've tried rezoning in the past, we've tried looking at different areas, but ultimately it comes down to the lack of the infrastructure that we have in the unincorporated areas. Some of the areas that are well suited would be on the periphery of the cities, where annexations could occur, or if there's an extension of a sewer line or a water line. Unfortunately, with a lot of the moratoriums in place, especially in Brook Trails and Redwood Valley and so on, that's ultimately what results in the constraints that the county is unable to meet its housing allocations. So with that, Jesse Davis with our department has some specific items that he'd like to go over with regards to the methodology.
Thank you, Nash. Hello, everyone. Jesse Davis, Planner 3. I worked with the Mendocino Council of Governments on developing this methodology, as well as responding to the Department of Housing and Community Development with regards to the initial determination. The county insists that the selected methodology is still too reliant on population share, and clearly housing need is not only related to population but also land capacity. As it currently stands, the development of assigned units in unincorporated Mendocino County could only be realized with unforeseeable and unplanned improvements to infrastructure capacity. Assigning housing units to the county without a corresponding fiscal analysis of the needed build-out for water, septic, transportation infrastructure, as Nash has mentioned, is unsound. While it is understood that the county and regional partners have a shared obligation to provide housing commensurate with anticipated population growth, the previously prepared allocation does not appropriately affect land capacity, available infrastructure, or its limited residential development potential. So we just wanted to go on record with that statement, and earlier provided a memorandum written from the county to the Mendocino Council of Government. Thank you very much.
So I just want to clarify the August 10th memorandum that Nash mentioned is the statement of constraints that is included in Appendix B.
Excuse me, how does the fire affect these with burning so much land? I read someplace, and I don't, because the city council is going through the same thing today on Wednesday, is that they burnt a number of structures, but a very, very few number have had new permits, and that's got to have a bearing. The insurance company will not pay for the infrastructure pieces to their house plus the foundation. They have to tear all that out, and that's on the person that lived in the house. And does any of this stuff ever cross anybody's mind that, when you have insurance, that you can't build your whole house again, that because of the insurance companies you have to come up with, quite a bit of money just to, to get started on the house? No? Yes?
I don't know. I can't say whether HCD has considered those things or is even aware of that. I know that it's true. Somebody that we work with on our Lake County side lost his home in the Valley Fire and had that exact problem that you're referring to. So I know that that's true. But I can't speak to how HCD responds to that.
Thank you.
Okay, Michael?
Yeah, I have a question for the gentleman. You said that there's a possibility that the rebuilds will count, but what's disturbing to me is let's say we lost 130 homes and they only pull permits for 75 because the rest of the people aren't going to rebuild and they're going to relocate. Wouldn't that come back to haunt us eventually, because our total housing stock is reduced? And so for me, I don't see how an agency can say a rebuild is going to count and not throw it in your face, but by the way, you've lost a certain percentage. Do you think that is what's going to happen eventually?
If I may, through the chair, Councilmember Chimolino, so far we've issued close to 80 permits in the rebuild area, and we've lost over 300 homes. not all homes are going to be rebuilt. I've talked to my counterparts in Sonoma, Napa, Lake County, and Sonoma doesn't expect to see the 5,000 units rebuilt. It's going to take a long time. Yes, I agree with you. It will come back to haunt us because you're not going to see the amount of rebuilding that needs to be put back. Not only do you have to rebuild the 300 homes plus that were damaged, but you also have to account for the 1,300 plus units that the allocation numbers are calling for from the state that we actually reestablish countywide. And as Councilmember Stransky pointed out, insurance has a big play in this, and not everybody is finding that they have sufficient insurance. We've heard of a lot of folks out there who have underinsured, no insurance, and these people are leaving the system. It's no different than when people become unemployed and they stop drawing benefits, and then once they draw benefits, they disappear and fall off the face of the earth in the eyes of the state. That's what's going to happen with a lot of the housing issues in this county, is that the funds aren't there to replace all these housing units. And so I think, no, the state, and I keep saying this over and over, the state doesn't look at what's going on the ground. They just assign these numbers and say, good luck, and if you don't meet them, we'll slap you on the wrist. But they really need to see what's going on with our rural communities. I went through the 2008 housing element process here with the county, and a lot of it was arguing back and forth and trying to explain to the state that we had constraints, especially in Brook Trails. We had constraints on the outer edges of the city of Ukiah. We had constraints in Anderson Valley. A lot of their answers were, go back to the drawing board. So you can only do so much with the infrastructure that's out there, and I just really don't see that we're going to see a lot of these units coming back immediately. During the planning period, countywide, 1,349 units. Will we get there? I seriously doubt it.
Thank you.
Could someone explain to me the consequences of not meeting these criteria?
That's a good question, because I think the consequences are shifting, as I understand it.
That's correct. So the local agencies, at one point in time, it was easy to say, well, you just have to accommodate for these. You have to have the appropriately zoned land to accommodate for this many units. There have been times when even that has been a challenge, but there weren't a lot of teeth to the law. However, that is changing. There's been a lot of legislation, some that has gone through, some that's proposed. One example is it AB 32? It's in the methodology statement. SB 35. So, as an example, SB 35, it requires certain development proposals to be streamlined if they meet certain criteria, and that is triggered when a local agency is not meeting adequate progress toward housing development identified in the housing element. At this point in time, the city of Ukiah is I believe, the only jurisdiction within Mendocino County that is not subject to the requirements of SB 35. However, in order for a proposed development to be eligible for those the streamlined approval process, that development has to meet a number of criteria as well, and the land, of course, has to already be zoned appropriately for the proposed development. So it's not that anybody can just come in and build anything anywhere, but it does take away a certain degree of the decision making. So there are some consequences.
So, Nafili, isn't it true that there's also some suggested legislation that would potentially say that jurisdictions that fail to meet these numbers could potentially be ineligible for grants from the state? I think I've heard that kicked around.
That may be. I am not familiar with that particular piece of legislation, but I know there are several things that have been proposed. So I am unfamiliar with that one. Unfortunately, land use planning is not typically part of our responsibility. So
I have a couple questions. One is, so we still have the public hearing. Do we have any other members of the public who would like to speak on this subject? Okay. Well, if we don't have any more members of the public, maybe we'll you want to go ahead?
I have one more item I would like to bring up that, again, a little selfish for the county, but this is something that I'd like to throw out there for the record in more what I call constraints that actually allows me to question how quickly we can actually build units. And I know that the Board of Supervisors is aware that we're working on our accessory dwelling unit ordinance that we've already gotten through the Planning Commission. We're going to the board next. We are currently launching the ADU process in the coastal zone. We have a consultant on board that will help us move that process along quickly. But one of the things in my discussions with the State Coastal Commission that also concerns me as we move forward, because we're looking at any housing unit we can get in the county that we can use to count. And so when we started having preliminary discussions with Bob Merrill with the Coastal Commission several months back, is we asked about the second unit or the accessory dwelling units. And one of the things that Bob brought up was that we would probably need to open up the Highway 1 traffic capacity study again, which is something that in the past when we thought about it, we would go to MCOG and look for funding. And so this is one of those things that if we have to look at all of these other studies just to get second units or accessory dwelling units in the coastal zone, that's also going to hamper our ability to be able to add units in the unincorporated area. The other thing about the accessory dwelling units, the junior accessory dwelling units in general, require that they have a deed notification placed on or a deed restriction that they're just for that type of use. In the past, our second unit ordinance, or our what do you call our accessory dwelling unit, basically was a combination of second units and accessory units, but we've always called them detached bedrooms and guest cottages. That's what a junior ADU is today, is basically a guest cottage or a detached bedroom. So by adding all these other, I'll call them deed restrictions out there, will people want to build these things because they can only be used for residential and not necessarily turn them into Airbnbs and so on. So again, I just throw that out as something to for consideration. And again, as Jess said, this is we want to go on record indicating our concerns. Thank you.
Okay. Any other public comment? I'm thinking we'll close the public hearing at 7 after 2. So. First of all, I want to thank Nafili and MCOG staff for doing what they could to reduce the RENA numbers. I saw a chart recently put together by the Strategic Growth Council, which is a little division in the governor's office, that showed the Northern California region that included Mendocino, Humboldt, Del Norte, and then upper parts of Central California at a growth rate, I think, of only 1% a year. And that was the slowest rate of growth of anywhere in California. And I'm curious, if one arm of the state is projecting that for our region that we're in, are they projecting a higher rate in with the RENA numbers?
So, in regards to the actual projected population growth, it's really minimal. Neither Department of Finance or the Department of Housing and Community Development are saying we're going to have a high growth in population. What they are saying is that because of while maybe some of the age groups will be shrinking, some of our age groups will be growing, and that is what is going to lead to the need for these housing units. As I mentioned, if you have an older population, you need more housing units because people of that age tend to have, you don't have little kids in the household typically. So you have, even though you don't necessarily have a larger population, you have a greater need for housing units.
So you essentially have a need for more 1 and maybe 2-bedroom units.
That could be, yes.
Well, presumably a
Right.
retired couple or a retired individual doesn't need a 4-bedroom house. So what is the possibility? Is the door completely shut in reapproaching the state on these numbers, or have we received our last and final offer?
What is included as Appendix A is our final determination, and yes, I think that's done. Yeah, and it was a 52% reduction from the original determination. So,
Okay, can Loretta speak?
yeah.
No, it's just when you're through.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I had an answer to your question about if it affects grants. I thought I had read something. And for the 1920 grant program, it says that city and county applicants must have a compliant housing element in order to be eligible for grants. So I don't know how their allocation affects their compliant housing element.
Having a compliant housing element and meeting progress towards, development of housing units, I think, are two different things. But is that for the Caltrans planning grants?
Right, for the plan grants. So if they're not meeting their allocation, I don't know if they would be compliant.
I think those would be two different things, and at this point, I believe everybody is has compliant housing elements. However, adoption of this plan will start the process over again, and the next round of housing elements will be due by August of 2019.
Okay, Director Chimleo.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. In Fort Bragg, we have about 2,900 water meters, and I would have to say that probably 2,600 of those are probably residences. Well, just looking at the numbers here, the 137 is about 5%. If the state predicts 1% growth, I'm just curious of how we got at a 5% need based on the 1% growth. Because if I look at Ukiah, which is right above us, they're like have 100 more, but I think they have way more residences. So I'm just a little curious about how the 137 for Fort Bragg was calculated, just because I'm looking at the differences in population, and it's fine the way it is, but I was just curious about that.
So this allocation it started proportionate to the 2008 RENA process because in that cycle we also had a very high allocation and a shorter planning period. It was a 5-year planning period, whereas this is 8.7 years. So factors in that cycle would have impacted it. And then like I mentioned, it may be a 5% increase in units compared to 1% increase in population, but it may be that those sizes of those households are shrinking, and so they actually need more housing units.
That makes sense.
And I agree, these numbers, even reduced, these numbers are going to be a challenge. They're going to be a challenge for everybody. Like I said, the city of Ukiah is currently the only jurisdiction that is making adequate progress, what the state considers adequate progress on development of housing units.
See, one of the issues we have over on the coast is, like, right now, the last city lot that was available for sale just went into escrow. And right now, we don't even have the access to the land to even think about building 137 homes. I know we have the mill site, but that is so far down the road because there's no infrastructure. you know, whether or not the states and the coastal, whether the state, you know, regional water quality will allow us to expand everything. So that's the real thing that we're having a problem with over there, because we're the city council, we're going through it right now, and so the consequence part, they're never going to come along and try to fine us, or is that something that may happen in the future?
I don't know that there would be fines necessarily, but you know, not having access to grants, that would be, you know, that's the kind of penalty that you could expect.
Right.
Or having,
because all the grants in the world aren't very good for it if you don't have the land to do it, you know. I mean, we have some tracts of land that are held by families, but we're getting ready to do we're in the process of trying to do a Danco project on one of the last large parcels in Fort Bragg, and it's only going to provide, I think, 60 units, but I think there's 45 units, 15 market rate, 15 for homeless and disabled veterans, and then we have 15 low income. And that's taken up a large piece of land next to our hospital. And, you know, there's just not very many spaces left, so this is going to be a real tough thing for, I think, all of us.
So the numbers from the state, the total number in each income category, we can't change that. If the council wants to make adjustments to the way that's broken down, that's certainly something that you can do. But we cannot change the total numbers in each income category.
I think you've done a good job with this. It's just, you have to come up with a number, and you have to be reasonable and use all the data that's available. And I think this is reasonable, but the reality is of where we're at least in Fort Bragg, it's going to be tough.
Sorry, did you have something?
No.
No.
How much weight, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, how much weight is given to historic growth rate within each city or the county, as far as determining these numbers?
Well, it wasn't based strictly on population. That was part of the consideration, but then other factors were considered as well, such as the availability of land and infrastructure. But historic growth rate was not a huge part of this particular.
It was part of the mix, though.
It was part of it, yeah.
I mean, I certainly understand that we cannot change the total numbers, but I would certainly be open to us looking at the allocation of numbers. And I think that Interim Director Nash brings up a good point that there just is not the infrastructure in the county to do some of these projects like Fort Bragg is doing, where we have, 45 units. When we have moratorium on water in the county, those high density projects are not possible. So I certainly think it would be more feasible to move some of those low and very low into perhaps the city of Ukiah that seems to be somewhat lower than some of the other cities. I mean, we have the city of Ukiah with numbers barely double that of Willits, although the population of infrastructure is significantly higher. So I'm not sure who else is open to moving some numbers around, but it seems to me that we need to really look at where our very low and low need to be placed.
That is interesting about the Ukiah has 18% of the population today, but they only have 16% of the very low presumed to go in there. They seem to have a fair amount of infrastructure in Ukiah.
I agree, and I think when we look at the needs, they talk about our group is going to be 75 and older that we're looking at, and having those individuals in the unincorporated areas is not best. I mean, I certainly run into plenty of complaints from seniors that are trying to live out Bell Springs or Spy Rock or Laytonville, and there's no bus service down to the hospitals. The ability to get an IHSS worker there for them is difficult. The roads are bumpy and hard on their back and their necks. I mean, I really think as a county, we need to think about trying to keep those individuals near the services that they need.
I will say that, because no one's here from the city of Ukiah to comment on this, but I know that one factor that was considered is the availability not just of infrastructure but of vacant land. And I know that's a concern that the city of Ukiah staff that participated has expressed, and it was a factor in previous RENA plans as well.
Where does the ability to annex come into play in this? I mean, that was in our statement. Is that correct?
There is an annexation policy that was developed several years ago that is included in the plan starting on page 10. So this was actually adopted by MCOG in 2002.
And I did read through that, but that's part of our allocation statement, correct? Is the annexation portion, or for the methodology?
Yes, the methodology statement included annexation as a factor to consider.
Okay.
Nafili, what kind of documentation besides this plan, if any, can be provided to the state? I realize, I assume that the appendixes, which include the comment letters from the county and the cities, would be included
Yes.
in the document. Is there any additional, like a letter that could be submitted by the MCOG board also as an attachment, or is it too late to add that?
No, I think that I think we could add anything we want at this point. You know, we have to submit the plan and the resolution to the state. A letter could go along with it if there are additional concerns that we want to express to the state. Or if there's additional documentation that the local agencies have, those could be attached as an additional appendix.
I guess part of my concern is, it seems if we can't change the numbers because they've given us their last and final offer, but if we think it's extremely likely that every jurisdiction, except maybe the city of Ukiah, is not going to be able to reach these numbers, not due to constraints on permit processes. It's not like we're not like, I don't think there's a single jurisdiction here that requires a design review for an accessory dwelling unit, although that is required in some communities in California, or it has been up until recently. And you know, we don't have, outside the coastal zone, we don't have any design kind of related constraints to development of housing. So it's not like there's discretionary actions being taken by the cities or the county that's denying people the right to build. It has more to do with infrastructure or available land with infrastructure. And just the market forces, the cost when people are trying to pencil out, you know, a homeowner acts as their own general contractor, might be looking at $250 a square foot. If they hire a general contractor, they might be looking at $350 a square foot. There's not much you can build beyond a very, very small unit that's going to be affordable if you also have to buy land. So it's just the economics of it that are, I think, making it unlikely that anyone's going to meet those numbers without deep subsidies. And the state's eliminated redevelopment housing funds. They've not yet provided a real funding source that comes anywhere near redevelopment in terms of dollars. And It just seems to me that maybe some letter along those lines that, you know, we're adopting a plan based on numbers you've given us, but the jurisdictions that make up MCOG feel that these numbers are going to be unattainable unless there's an infusion of state and federal dollars, specifically for the low and the very low income units, because they can't be built at market rate. There's I think some number of the low income could be achieved by looking at people who build second units that are affordable by design, because there is no additional land costs. Units that, you know, I don't know what the magic number is, but, you know, the building department issues building permits for, let's say, a 600 square foot or 500 square foot one bedroom unit, and if it's modest in terms of the finishings, and the assessor's office has that information, maybe there could be an internal decision that says if it meets this criteria, it would be presumed to be low income as a rental, not very low, because that would require deep subsidies. But if it's above that, then it's probably going to be a moderate unit. But other than that, I don't see how we're going to get any many units that are low and moderate that aren't subsidized units, and there just aren't that many subsidized units being built in Mendocino County. We don't. So anyway, I just think we could probably have a letter just explaining the fact that we're approving these numbers almost with protest.
Yeah, I think we could definitely do that. And, you know, your point about none of the local agencies are, it's not like you've got developers beating down the door wanting to come in and build these things and you're turning them away. And I think, unfortunately, that is maybe happening in other more urban parts of the state, but everybody has to pay the price for those things happening. So I think that expressing those concerns definitely be reasonable and something that we could do.
And then I didn't notice it in the letter from the county, but does it talk about our accessory dwelling unit ordinance, the fact that we're taking steps to increase the availability of second units, because we kind of skipped over it, but basically in the county outside the coastal zone, you can build by right a second unit, and the second unit has no size limitation. We do have some refinements to that, but we're also allowing people to build, I'm going to call it a half unit, what we're calling under state law junior accessory dwelling unit, 500 square feet or less. So really the county is going from 2 units per parcel to 2.5 in some ways. So that's a pretty big step. I don't think the county can do a whole lot more than that on accessory dwelling units. It's probably as much as anybody in the state's doing. So maybe if there could be some notation of that action by the county, and some desirability, maybe some flexibility in how the units are recorded or reported back to the state.
I have a question. When it comes to, like when we have the amnesty program and people come in and, you know, say they've converted a barn into now a living quarter, do those then count as a new house when we have the amnesty program and people are coming in?
I would imagine they do. There are reports. Are they quarterly reports? Do you have to submit reports quarterly to on progress? Yeah.
Thanks.
Nash Gonzalez, Interim Planning Building Services Director. So what you're looking at is when we go back and examine or re-examine our current housing element to show how well we've done, we'll take those into consideration and report out how many units were built, how many units were picked up during the amnesty process, and so on. But that doesn't solve the problem going forward. And the other thing is, the council is well-intentioned on sending a letter, but my experience over the last 25 years with the state is, thank you very much, you still have to meet those numbers. So it's really more of an allocation that's reality rather than sending them a letter. I've gone through 6 housing elements, and it's the same exercise every 5 years. And so it's really, you've been assigned these numbers, now go do it. We don't have any penalties out there as of yet, but who knows what happens in the next 8 years, whether they will actually come down with a new Assembly bill or a new Senate bill, because there's a lot of bills that are floating right now in the House that are looking at the housing crisis in California. I mean, the median house price peaked in 2007 at $594. It's now at over $700,000. And so that right now is telling you that there's a crisis in California. But again, the state solution is everybody gets to play their fair share, not the ones that need to pay, but the ones that have already tried but can't will do it anyway, like us. You know, constrained by the environment, constrained by the lack of water. The state of California says, sorry, you still have to abide by it. There's just no way around it.
Does someone want to make a motion?
Can I ask first if the
Necessary.
chairman would be willing to write a protest letter to go along with this?
I'd be happy to be part of writing a letter.
Okay.
You know, with MCOG staff and input from any of the planning directors.
I will make the recommended motion for
A second.
And would that include authorization from a letter from
Yes.
the board? Okay. Okay. We'll call roll call.
Okay. Stransky,
Yes.
Wasserman,
Yes.
Chimolino,
Yes.
Ranachek,
Yes.
Krosky,
No.
and Jurdy.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Now we're going to convene as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency and recess as that and reconvene as the Policy Advisory Committee. First thing on the agenda is public expression. Do we have any public comments on non-agenda items? Okay. Seeing none, we're going to go to regular calendar, which is presentation of North Coast and Upstate Fuel Cell Electric Vehicle Readiness Project.
Now for something completely different. Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, well, you have my written staff report about this project. It was started in 2015 and is now nearing completion. This presentation is a task required by the state grant to provide some general education and exposure to the topic of hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles. It's the North Coast and Upstate Hydrogen Fuel Cell Electric Vehicle Readiness Project. So while MCOG's focus to date has been on battery electric vehicles, which are more readily available and prevalent technology, these hydrogen cars are also under the umbrella of zero-emission vehicles. They're basically one of two types. There's the battery electrics and the fuel cell electrics, which the state of California is addressing. So we have, looks like I skipped a slide somewhere. Well, anyway, the slide that I seem to be missing there is just to show you what I'm going to cover today, a little introduction overview, some state and regional goals, basics about the technology, frequently asked questions, some planning and outreach in Northern California. So I do have quite a few slides here. If you have questions, maybe you could hold them till the end, see if they get answered during this presentation, unless they're just quick clarifying types of questions, just to make sure I can get through all this material without taking all day long. I have kind of a ridiculous number of slides here. This is a presentation that was created by Redwood Coast Energy Authority for us to use. It was a Train the Trainer webinar that I took, and so I've modified this somewhat for our purposes today. And the project is funded by a California Energy Commission grant. The project is led by Redwood Coast Energy Authority. These partners include Humboldt State University's Schatz Energy Research Center, the local government commission, several counties, and some regional organizations. And those regions are 9 counties represented by various regional agencies. Redwood Coast Energy Authority is a joint powers agency like MCOG, except their focus is on energy. So there's an energy joint powers. There are 2 regional transportation planning agencies, ourselves and Shasta County. There are 3 air quality districts and an economic development council in this group. These are just some recent projects by Redwood Coast Energy. They've done an electric vehicle readiness plan, something like what we've done here in Mendocino County. They actually have built and operate an electric vehicle charging network. And they have done an alternative fuels readiness plan in which we participated. You've heard me talk about that before. So what's the purpose of the grant, this particular grant? Mainly, they are focusing on siting infrastructure. Part of the grant was this little plan that was produced in here in my hand is a regional hydrogen infrastructure plan for the North State. And so they identified in that Eureka and Redding areas as macro sites to find sites within that micrositing. So also in later phases 2 and 3, they have identified Ukiah, Clear Lake, and Crescent City for consideration as some major areas for siting these stations. But that's a ways down the line. The other thing is just kind of what they're saying, priming the market. Just basically local preparation and readiness actions that can be initiated in advance, just general familiarity with the issue, things that we can do to get ready. And what is driving all of this? Well, we have some state and regional goals. For instance, there is the California Zero Emission Vehicle Action Plan, and that includes executive orders by Governor Jerry Brown, some state legislation. There's some economic factors that are built into that plan. So that's a big thing that's driving this. Current status of that effort. In terms of the fuel cell cars, this is up through October 2017, so there's probably some progress since then, but about 2,700 fuel cell electric vehicles have been sold and leased. 20 buses are in operation, transit buses in California, and there are about 31 retail hydrogen stations. Under development at that time were 33 more buses, 4 shuttles, and 30 more retail stations. And as you can see, those yellow areas are urban areas where there's concentration. The California Air Resources Board is in charge of prioritizing the rollout of the stations using their modeling tool. And of course, they're focusing first on those kinds of areas. So there is a comprehensive list of station status you can find at the California Fuel Cell Partnership website. I'll mention that group again in a moment. As far as vehicle sales, they're up over the past 3 years from about 100 in 2015 to about 3,800 in 2018. Not large numbers, but a big increase in those numbers. And the target for this particular plan for the North State is 94 fuel cell electric vehicles by the year 2020. The projection goes up from there through the year 2024 to a high of 325 fuel cell cars in the North State. That's kind of a snapshot of that chart there. And this chart shows an estimated...
Was that chart of vehicles or charging stations? I thought it was charging
vehicles,
stations.
I believe. Unless I'm reading this one
no,
wrong.
I think you go back one.
Let's go back one. Okay. Fueling stations. I'm sorry. I meant fueling stations on that one. 5 fueling stations, 94. I'm just moving a little too fast. 5 stations and 94 vehicles by 2020. sorry. And then they, as you can see, there's some farther out years where they're increasing even further. So North Coast, I see from 94 goes up to 175, 222, 274, up to 325 vehicles. And I do not see in that the number of stations. We don't have a big target for the number of stations. It's kind of hard to get those going. Yeah, this is quantities of fuel. It shows an estimated 6% increase in regional electricity consumption as a result of this, but a 10% reduction in gasoline and diesel fuel. So you got a net savings there. This chart comes from the Northwest California Alternative Fuels Readiness Plan. It was part of that project we were doing with them, completed in 2016. Okay, so how does this technology work? Yeah, I had to dust off my knowledge of this a little bit for the presentation. It's interesting science. There's an excellent description at that website I've got on your screen there at the Smithsonian Institution's educational site. And the material's under copyright, so I did look at that. I'm going to paraphrase from this and other sources to cover this part of the presentation. Here's another source, how a fuel cell works, from the California Fuel Cell Partnership that I mentioned a moment ago. That's an industry and government collaborative founded in 1999. They've been around for a while. The members include auto manufacturers, energy companies, fuel cell technology firms, and government agencies, so quite a coalition. And this chart illustrates the most common type of hydrogen fuel cell used commercially, the proton exchange membrane, or the PEM fuel cell. There are various types, 5 or 6 that I know of that use liquid or solid materials. This is a solid. But no matter what the fuel cell type, hydrogen and oxygen are used to generate electricity. Essentially, the hydrogen fuel enters a cell where a catalyst, some form of electrolyte, splits the electrons off of the hydrogen atoms. The electrons provide a current directed through wires to an electric motor. And to complete the cycle, oxygen enters the cell and combines with the returning electrons and hydrogen ions that are circulating within the cell. And this combination of the bond of the hydrogen and oxygen forms water, which drains out of the cell. So it's pretty nifty science, I think. It's pretty high tech. So you can, here's another chart that I like better. It's a little easier to read, a little better graphic. So off on the left, the hydrogen's coming in, oxygen coming in from the top there, and the exhaust off on the right is going out as water. So in a fuel cell, electricity is generated through a chemical reaction rather than combustion, which is what you have in your gasoline cars. So fuel cells are not subject to the laws of thermodynamics that limit conventional power plants, such as car engines, which waste most of the fuel through exhaust, causing air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. I think with combustion engines, I think the best you can do is something like 35% or something efficiency. And electric vehicles are far, far more efficient than that, something like 90% or so. So therefore, because it's a chemical reaction, the fuel cells are more efficient in extracting energy from a fuel, and even waste heat from some kinds of cells that produce a little waste heat can be harnessed and boost the system efficiency even more. So one of the great appeals of fuel cells is that they generate electricity with very little pollution. And as I mentioned, much of the oxygen and hydrogen used in the cell combine on their way out to form a harmless byproduct, which is water, pure H2O. And really, that's about all I can say about this before I get out of my depth. It's kind of technical. Here are a few of the cars on the market. Honda, Toyota, and Hyundai have cars. Hyundai was due to launch its Nexo model sometime this year, with a range of 370 miles. That's pretty good. They do have superior range over battery electrics. Transit buses, public transit is another major transportation mode using hydrogen fuel. So here are some of the agencies doing that. Sunline Transit down in the desert there has been a leader for several decades, operating transit buses and fueling stations. The buses are still quite expensive. As you can see, it says they're $700,000 to $1.5 million each at that point. We'll see. Maybe they'll come down. The electric buses have been coming down in price a bit too. And here's a prototype of a semi-truck, fuel cell driven. Here's a selfie I couldn't resist sticking in there with a hydrogen truck that I saw in downtown Vancouver way back in 2009. Fueling stations, here's some examples, what they look like. These are in Southern California. I believe these are in South Pasadena, Riverside, and Lawndale. I don't know where Lawndale is. Anybody know? It's somewhere down south. Okay. So how do they stack up? Here's a comparison of fuel cell versus battery electric vehicles. As usual, there are trade-offs. For instance, the fuel cell vehicles have faster fueling time, like 3 to 5 minutes to fuel up, as opposed to electrics, which take a lot longer. They have longer range than most EVs, and the cars do cost more for the fuel cell cars. I don't have a figure on the fuel cost. I have not seen what that is. And on the other hand, battery electrics and charging stations are more readily available, and the cars have a longer life. Electricity is cheap too, so we have a cheaper fuel on that one, probably. We do have some, I've got some links here to the lifetime of either car. There's a lot of data behind this. So you've got to make the hydrogen fuel to fuel those cells. So in terms of production, it's important to consider the energy source. Again, there are trade-offs. You want to consider both environmental and economic factors. You want to take the best advantage, make the most of opportunities from renewable sources. There is regulation in California's mandate that 33% of commercial fuel must be renewable. And I'll just note that, one criticism of hydrogen fuel that I've heard is about the energy needed to make the fuel, and you just want to make sure there's a net gain in terms of efficiency and emissions at the end of that. If you're using a lot of fossil fuels to make fuel, to make zero-emission vehicles, kind of doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But there are opportunities to use renewables to make hydrogen fuel. And here are two main pathways, 2 ways to produce pure hydrogen gas that are pointed out here. The steam methane forming method, that uses fossil fuel, and it's cheaper than the other method. But on the other hand, you can use landfill gas and capture some greenhouse gases that would otherwise be released. You can recycle that waste product. So that's a plus. The electrolysis method can use renewable energy. It costs a little more, and it's reliant on, it needs to be tied to a grid. Of course, electrolysis is where you would apply electricity to break out hydrogen from water, and you separate it from the oxygen in the atom. That's electrolysis. Here are some renewable energy opportunities that are happening. The Trinity Dam has cheap greenhouse gas emission-free hydropower to Northern California. Another example is the Blue Lake Rancheria, which has a solar photovoltaic array there, you see. I've also identified biomass as a potential to make pure fuel cell electric vehicles, fuels, and that came out of this hydrogen infrastructure plan. There's a reference to that we have a lot of biomass in this county, and that could be another source too, to make very pure hydrogen fuel to the standards you need for purity in a car. Other uses, this is the National Renewable Energy Lab's Wind to Hydrogen project in Boulder, Colorado. And I guess they're using it for storage. There's a lot of things you can do with that. I don't know a lot about that particular project. And speaking of the wind to hydrogen, I've got to do one more kind of presentation. I'm looking for a science teacher that might help with that final task we need to do. We've got a classroom, a kit that we can set up in a classroom, shows how you make hydrogen from wind or solar. And that's compatible with various approved curricula for education. So this kind of neat to show the concept to middle school or high school level kids. So what else have we got here? Other uses. These are some of the other opportunities and best uses for fuel cells. They're great for things like forklifts and warehouses. They don't have emissions. They have a lot of torque and can lift heavy things, and faster refueling and things like that. They're good for backup power systems, and they note the example of telecommunications. That can be important, especially when we have disasters that we have to respond to. And I'm almost done. Here are some of the frequently asked questions I'll breeze through, and then I'll give you time to ask some questions. Why are we educating people if they can't buy these cars in our region yet? Well, the Department of Energy talks about the need for education in readiness for the new technology. How toxic is it? It's not toxic. Hydrogen is a non-toxic fuel. It's not poisonous to people. It can't pollute, and it diffuses very quickly. Isn't it highly combustible? I think I heard that question a little earlier today. Yeah, this talks about state and federal safety standards for hydrogen fuels. There's a link in there that goes to more information on that. Here's an illustration of some of the safety points on a fuel cell electric vehicle. You know, the blue dots are hydrogen sensors. They can detect leaks. They say it's unlikely it'll leak, but if they do detect that, the tank will automatically seal. It's also designed to shut down the car or to isolate high voltages if necessary. The yellow, or they look orange over here, triangles are impact sensors, so they can detect a collision just like airbags do. They can also seal fuel in the tank, isolate high voltages. So, you know, they've been working on this stuff for a long time to make them safe for the public. Where does the money come from? In California, it's mainly from the greenhouse gas cap and trade funds. It's a lot of money in that program. And it's the type of thing that program's supposed to fund. What funding is there for the cars and the fueling stations? Well, there are various grant programs through federal and state energy agencies. There's a couple examples there. Low to no emission bus program, and California Energy Commission has various programs. And next steps. Next steps for the project lead, Redwood Coast Energy, are shown here. This was about 6 months ago, but it gives you an idea of the kind of tasks they've been doing. Project's about to end. It ends in September. We're wrapping up a few of the final tasks now, doing some reporting, invoicing, and these educational presentations. So securing site hosts, finishing the site readiness plan, doing a report on the micrositing. Outreach is another thing we've all been working on. Looks like at that point they had some more meetings. I think those have been done by now. Incorporate hydrogen and all the outreach on this subject, general subject. and give resources to us project partners to do presentations like this. So that's the gist of that one. I don't have links to all of these resources, but can get materials if anyone requests them. There are plenty of resources available. And that's about it. If there are any questions, thank you very much. I know it's kind of outside the realm of what we usually work with. What do you got?
This is very interesting.
Okay.
I'd like to know, when you get to 75,000 miles in your vehicle, does anybody know what the cost is to repower? What happens? Does the fuel cell just go bad? I'm just curious if you knew.
I imagine there are parts that wear out or materials that wear out.
Okay.
You know.
Do you know if anybody in the hydrogen community has looked at like using the geysers where we use natural steam to put in the infrastructure to make hydrogen in areas, and especially any type of power plant that creates steam? You think
Capturing
you could do
waste
that?
steam. Yeah.
I don't know. Anything?
Probably. Yeah. There's a name for that. I've forgotten what that's called. It's yeah. There are energy facilities that can capture the waste heat, waste steam, and use it for something else.
My last question is, do you looking at, it says in the report that it's $2 million per station. They want to build 5, and they're hoping to get 94 vehicles.
They're very expensive. I was a little shocked. They're $2 million a piece for a pump, not even a station. One pump.
My question is, that's $106,000 per vehicle, and I'm trying to wrap my head around how somebody is going to get their investment back. But it says there's a grant plus match. Do you know if the grant is substantially more than the match when it comes to an investor wanting to build the station?
So I think they usually are. Yeah, I'm not sure how they're doing it in this particular case.
Because this is a really good thing if they could get this thing going. It's very expensive.
Yeah, and you've got to look at what is it good for? Are there applications for these cars that are better, that are more suited than just battery electric vehicles would be? A lot of people are skeptical about that. Why do we have to do that? But, there are pluses and minuses in both of those technologies. And so it's a matter of finding what's the best application for it. And it is a big investment. The state is working on this in a big way. They're throwing a lot of money at these things, and that's one of the things they're doing. So,
do you know if the hydrogen, the actual plants that make and compress the hydrogen into fuel, are they in the Bay Area right now? I'm just looking at the distribution because they're going to have to truck it to Eureka or Reading. I was just curious where they make it.
Yeah, I hope those are zero-emission vehicle trucks that are moving that fuel around.
But I mean, though, is
how far is it? Does
yeah,
have to go?
Is the infrastructure close by? Because if they want to put it in Reading and Eureka, and we don't have any in Santa Rosa or Ukiah or even, part way up, I was just curious of why they want to go so far north with the infrastructure maybe being, you think you'd start where your source is and then work your way out. So.
Well,
if we can do something like this, I mean, look at the.
This is early days still, you know. This is kind of a futuristic thing. Well, it seemed like I've heard about it for a long time, and it was always 20 years out, no matter when you ask this question. But it seems like they're making some progress and working out some of those bugs and doing some strategy around it. This is kind of outside my area. I'm not that familiar with it.
I think it's a good thing. So, I mean, it's something to look at, and if they can get the grants and get this thing going, it's going to bring technology and industry into the northern part of the state where I'm not saying we're behind, but we are behind with some technology. So
and there's also things to think about, like energy independence, disaster preparedness, things like that. What if the grid goes down? What if that's the only thing you have, and you're using all electric vehicles, say for battery electric? Well, this is another technology uses a different pathway.
Right.
You know, you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. So don't be too dependent on one type of technology or infrastructure. I think that's part of the idea.
Okay.
So.
Any other questions? Okay. All right. Thanks, Janet.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
So the next thing on our agenda is amendment to the 2018 board calendar, schedule fall tour mobile workshop.
Yeah. So in the board calendar that was adopted at the beginning of the year, there was a placeholder in September for a potential tour. This could be, we don't have an exact date set, so that is what we are here to select today. It has been suggested that a potential tour location would be the Laytonville area, which would give the board the opportunity to see the new Branscombe Road pedestrian multi-use bridge that is currently being installed, and we are hopeful that by the time that we would be up there for a tour, that bridge would be possibly complete to the point that we could walk across, but if not, certainly we could see it if it's not ready to walk across. This would be an all-day tour and would include a short MCOG meeting, most likely, as an opportunity to conduct any business that is needed that month, but also give the local members of the public an opportunity to come and express themselves at an MCOG meeting, which is not typically in their area. This also, by our having this late August meeting, later than normal August meeting, we hope that it minimizes any regular business that would typically take place in September and allows us more time for a tour at that time. So Janet and I came up with some potential dates in September, the 5th, 10th, 17th, and 18th. An alternative would be that rather than have a special meeting in September, the tour could take place at the October 1st meeting, which would then take place off-site. So do you have anything to add, Janet?
That sounds about right. I understood from County Transportation a couple weeks ago, they thought they might be constructing or installing the bridge this week or next week. So hopefully that would be ready for us by the time we need. Oh, there's Howard. I forgot you were there. You can tell us all about it.
No.
That's not happening? Okay, we're going to get the real scoop now.
Hi, Howard DeShield, County Transportation. I told Phil that they were pouring the abutments, which they poured, but that's not the bridge yet. So once we have that done, we're out of the ground. And of course, this thing's pre-fabricated metal, 120 feet long, and they'll lower it on so they could work on it into the fall. So about all you're going to see if you go in September is the abutments. You probably won't see the bridge till later. Maybe that October meeting, but I'm not sure. So what I told Phil was we're pouring abutments.
And you need to be out of the creek by the 15th of October?
Right, but you can keep working on the bridge, see, because it's all, the abutments are done, you're done with the ground disturbance.
So Howard, what will we see if we went on October 1st, do you think?
This contractor. It's one of our local joys, Wailotti out of Covelo. They've been really behind. I don't know how else to say it. So I don't know where they're going to be by October. You know, this thing, once the pre-manufactured part goes on, I'm assuming they put it all together and they just kind of put it on in with a crane, so it might go really fast. But then they could work on it all winter, putting the walking deck on, you know. So I don't know. They've been really slow. So
Okay.
I don't know.
So
We don't have to walk on the bridge. I mean, you see where it is and what it's going to do.
right. I mean, it sounds like there
Look
may
at a
not
construction
be
project.
there may not be a bridge to see. You would see where the bridge is going to be.
And look at other connecting projects in the
Right.
area.
The previous investments that have been made in the area through MCOG and through competitive grants, the non-motorized infrastructure, that this bridge is essentially the link for other existing facilities. So
Should we wait as long as possible and give them enough time to do a little more work on it?
So what do people think about the November 5th meeting? We might see more, even if it's not finished.
Oh, November. Yeah, the weather's tends to be iffy at that point. We don't have any regular business planned yet for that meeting. Oh, we do have one thing. Sorry, we do have one, and Susan Branson from the California Transportation Commission is planning to come to one of our meetings, and that was a date that worked for her. It's going to bring her along.
yeah, I think if we chose to do a tour on that day, probably we would need to reschedule with her. Well, possibly, yeah.
That's the only thing I had in November.
Yes. So if the board wants to wait until there's actually a bridge, then it sounds like November might be a better bet. If you want to move forward in September or the October meeting, then like you will see where the bridge will be and what it might connect to.
Or we could wait until the spring. We could not do a tour in the fall. We could think of someplace else to go. That we've been to a lot of the places around the county already, and we're trying to look to where there's something new for you to look at and talk about. And so that seemed to be the most interesting thing right now up in Laytonville, but there are other options, I guess.
I think either October or November would be fine.
So wait a little longer and don't even try for September. It might be too early to. Yeah.
So would you prefer the regular October meeting or to wait until November?
I don't have a preference. I mean, I suppose if it's going to be a huge hassle to reschedule for what we already have in November, I'm okay with October. I think we can.
It's still fire season in October too. You know, the air quality, we don't know what it's going to be like for being outside a whole lot. So
yeah, I think as far as rescheduling, either way, it would be about the same. I mean, okay. October 1st and November 5th would both be regular meeting days, so it would still be on those same days, just a change of location.
Well, we used to have an issue when we had LAFCO members that had the morning meeting the same day we have our afternoon meeting and couldn't get away for an all-day tour. But that's not a problem anymore, no? We don't have any LAFCO members.
We don't seem to have that issue right now.
We don't have any LAFCO members anymore, so we could take a regular first Monday of the month.
Well, if rescheduling the CTC member is not a big hassle, I think I'd rather go for the November 5th. And
Okay.
although Sue's usually pretty busy.
I might just come for the last one. You know, somebody else needs to run it at this point.
You could make one of our tours for a change.
But I'm sure Mike would like to see it, so I don't
You
think
could
that would
both
be
come.
an issue either.
I've seen what's their At least once a month when I go to the MAC meetings.
I think I drove over just recently. Is it right next to the feed store in Laytonville? Out. Yep, that's it. Okay, I just drove over it. Yeah, or next to it.
Yeah. Some people never get up that way. We try to go to areas of the county that some people have never really seen or don't get to very often.
Okay, so I guess we're targeting the November 5th meeting then.
Okay, so we'll want to go back to the CTC executive director and ask to.
So I think, given the way our calendars work, I think we can then just drop the late September meeting.
We don't typically have a September meeting at
Yeah.
all because of the first Monday being Labor Day.
Mm-hmm.
So there'd be no meeting. That was just a placeholder really on our adopted calendar. So we can skip September altogether.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And shoot for November 5th and hope there's a little more construction ready to look at. Maybe there'll be a bridge.
Okay, yeah.
All right, we'll take that direction then. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Yeah. So next we have the consent calendar, which is approval of the June 4th minutes, approval of the May 17th Transit Productivity Committee minutes, and approval of the First Amendment to the fiscal year 18-19 Transportation Planning Overall Work Program. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved.
What's that?
So moved.
Okay.
I'll second.
Any comments on the consent calendar? Okay.
I'm sorry.
Do we need a roll call because money's involved?
Yes.
Second.
Oh, seconded.
Okay.
From.
I did.
Okay, thank you. Didn't catch that. Stransky,
Yes.
Wasserman,
Yes.
Ranachek,
Yes.
Krosky,
Yes.
Allstrand, and Chair Jurdy.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to recess as the Policy Advisory Committee and reconvene as the Regional Transportation Commission Agency. Do we have a motion to ratify?
So moved.
Second it.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. So now to reports, Mendocino Transit Authority.
I don't,
Yeah.
staff doesn't have anything.
Okay. North Coast Rail Authority.
Loretta's going to give a report.
For NCRA, they canceled their August meeting, but the next meeting will be in September in Eureka. But I wanted to give you a brief report on the NCRA-related item, Senate Bill 1029, which proposes to abolish the NCRA and create the new rail agency. So we learned that the bill passed the Assembly Appropriations Committee last week, and I have an email from Jason Lyles, who's staff with Senator McGuire, and he said the Assembly Appropriations made some significant changes to the bill, mostly at the administration's request, but it is still much better than what the administration wanted. We are working closely with the governor's office to try and find a compromise that will work for everyone. And then he goes on to say they are still uncomfortable with the timeline of the transfer and closure of the NCRA. But we are getting them all the information they have asked for, and hopefully they will see it our way soon. So we don't really know what the significant changes to the bill were that were made, but I checked with some legislative staff at the Capitol and was told that the changes that were made will be in print tomorrow, so we'll be able to know what those significant changes are. But we wanted to let you know that we are tracking that bill, of which you've sent 2 different support letters for. So that's all I had to report on NCRA.
Loretta? Because in the bill it states when the transfer is going to happen.
Yes.
So that's off now?
Well, that sounds like that's one of the significant changes, that the administration is uncomfortable with the timeline of the transfer. So that's all that the email said from the senator's staff.
But we
So
can get-
perhaps they think it's too close, I don't know. But I'll find that out tomorrow when they print the changes.
Thank you.
Okay.
And just one other thing, remember when Jason Lyles was here, he was saying that the bill would not go to the governor's office, or the governor would not sign the bill if in the end there wasn't funding
Right.
to implement all this. So
Right.
Do you know if we're seeing funding now put into the bill, or is that?
I asked that question this morning. This was to the Assembly Legislative Staff. I asked, did funding need to get addressed? And I was told that the funding, this seems to be the opposite of what we were told, but the staff said that the funding would likely follow in a budget bill or another bill. And
budget,
yeah. So that's not what we were told earlier. So I believe those are the discussions that are being happening right now with the administration. And I'm sorry I won't have the information until tomorrow. Hopefully I'll have more then. Okay.
So we have the MCOG staff summary of meetings. Anything you want to highlight?
I don't have anything to highlight. You received the report in a new streamlined format as part of your handouts today. I don't have anything to add.
Okay. Then we have
so
go through, yeah.
Hmm?
Do you continue on?
Yes. Under administrative reports, just a quick update on Senate Bill 1 implementation. Things are moving right along. I know the city of Point Arena was very excited. They were just able to award a contract using their LPP funding, which is the local partnership program. And a third year of that funding, call for projects is out right now for the third year of funding under that program. So that is some good news. The bad news is that as I'm sure you're all aware, a proposition qualified for the November ballot that would repeal Senate Bill 1. We, as staff, cannot do anything in terms of campaigning for or against anything like that, but we can definitely provide information, factual information, as far as what that would mean for our region. So Senate Bill 1, it looks like there's an estimate of about $4.5 million in guaranteed formula funding that would come to our region in fiscal year 18-19. That would go directly to the county and cities. We also, in the 2018 State Transportation Improvement Program, we, as a region, received approximately $7 million for programming, which was because of the revenues from Senate Bill 1 that flow into the STIP. Other areas where the region will see projects as a result of SB 1 funding are in the SHOP, which is the Caltrans implemented program that provides safety, operational, and maintenance type improvements on the highways. There are also increases to transit funding that MTA will benefit from, and then additional competitive grant programs that have seen significant increases in funding, which include the Active Transportation program, which a number of our local agencies have been successful in competing for that program, as well as the competitive portion of the local partnership program, and then an increase in the planning grants that MCOG and local agencies regularly use. So those are just some highlights, and then I wanted to just call your attention to a report that might be useful. This is a report that was commissioned by the California Alliance for Jobs, the California Transit Association, and Transportation California. It is the economic impacts of Senate Bill 1 on California. It has a lot of statewide information. There was a later breakdown by major metropolitan areas. Unfortunately, So we don't have a regional breakdown that is available, but certainly the statewide information is of use. It includes information like number of jobs that have been created through the revenue created by SB1 and overall economic impact. So I would encourage you all to take a look at that report. And then if you want any other information, we're happy to provide that. And that is all I've got on SB1. And I believe, are there any questions on that?
You said it was about $4.7 million that would that is guaranteed to go to the area, but I believe that number would go up over time, right?
Correct. That was just for fiscal year 18-19. That is the Local Streets and Roads program, loan repayment, which is a small portion, and then the local partnership program. But yes, as the revenues sort of ramp up over time, that annual amount will increase. And I believe there's an estimate of, there's a 10-year estimate of funding, and unfortunately I do not have it with me, but I want to say it was around $60 million over 10 years regionally, not just from those particular funding sources, but from all funding sources.
Okay, thanks.
For the region.
Then we have the 18-19 local agency subrecipient agreements.
Yes, you've got my written report. I just want to let you know that we have a second year of agreements going out. Is this on? Did you hear that? Okay. This is something that we started last year. So we have a 5-year master agreement with each of our 5 member agencies. And so now we're on the second year, and I've sent out the annual exhibits to each of the 5 agencies, and they I've got a couple of them back already. I just want to let you know that we're doing that. This is something that we have to do now. Since we receive state and federal funds and we pass them through, we've got to have a proper agreement that's signed by the subrecipients. So that is working well now. Everybody's getting used to it. Anything on that? It's just a quick notice to you all.
Okay, and we saw the press release and the announcement for the completion of the 13 installations throughout the county for the electric charging stations. So that's a nice accomplishment that was done in concert between State Parks, Mendocino Land Trust.
That's right. Exciting project. Took 4 years to get done. They did all the heavy lifting. I helped them out with some things throughout the whole project. We had other partners and contributors. Had a very nice event on Friday. We had pretty good turnout. 30 or so people, would you say? Nephili came, and up in Willits. Very nice. We had, Congressman Huffman's representative was there, and she presented a nice certificate to the Land Trust that I worked with her on. And also we had the field rep for Senator McGuire, and also he and Assemblyman Wood put together a nice certificate for them. And so we had a lot of recognition. We had a lot of media there. The local papers were there, and great photo op, and a couple electric cars. I had mine. We had a Tesla, and we, had a little educational talk about how this all came about, where we're going, and what we've accomplished. So I was very pleased with the result. It's a big step in our regional EV network.
Okay, all right. So then we have.
I do not.
Are there any miscellaneous reports?
I
can't think of any now.
Okay, then planning staff, county pedestrian needs assessment update.
Thank you. I wanted to give you an update report on the countywide pedestrian needs assessment and engineered feasibility study. This project is it's in two components. The Greater Point Arena and South Coast component was funded with state RPA funds, rural planning assistance, in the amount of $76,528, and the Inland and North Coast portion of the project was funded with the Caltrans Sustainable Communities Grant of $179,229 plus a local match for a total of $202,450. The consultant contract was $257,200. It was awarded in March to a group called Trail People, with sub-consultants GHD and Local Government Commission. So the project has been in process now for a few months. It's going well. We held the kickoff meeting in April. A technical advisory group, which includes county and city and Caltrans representatives, have met twice. That TAG group is meeting again this Wednesday following MCOG's technical advisory committee group. And planning is underway for the next, I don't know if I said, the first community workshop was held in Point Arena on June 19th, and that was well attended for the small community. And planning is underway right now for the next community workshops in October, which will be in Fort Bragg and in Ukiah. So the consultant has finished the draft existing needs report, existing conditions report, and I've had a lot of good input from county and city people. The goal is to list everything: inventory, pedestrian facilities, what's existing, what's planned, what's needed, with input from the communities. And basically, so when we have a finished product, any local agency can take that document and, you know, pick out a priority project and apply for grant funding. And we think it's going to be a good, useful document. So the project's in process and it's going well, and we're getting good participation. And I just wanted to give you an update on that.
Loretta, could maybe you email everyone on the board the dates and times and locations for those meetings?
The ones in October?
Yeah.
Yes, I can tell you the tentative dates.
Well, if you're still finalizing that, maybe you could just email it to everyone when you have a time and date location.
The October date is, the Fort Bragg date is set October 4th. The Ukiah date is going to be the 9th or the 11th. And yes, we can email when those are.
So October 4th, Fort Bragg, do you have a time and location?
You know, I don't, well, it's in conjunction with the City of Fort Bragg community meeting that the city's having regarding some pedestrian improvements. So I don't know for sure, but it would likely be town hall. But we'll send that out.
Great, thanks.
Okay, do you want me to send that out to the full board?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Okay. Okay. So that's the only report I have. Thank you.
Great, well, thanks. Okay, MCOG Director reports. Or are there any other planning related reports? No.
Anything else?
MCOG Director reports. Well, I think we've all seen some sidewalk work in downtown Willits.
We have. They've gone and blown and gone. They're going good.
That's part of the relinquishment program, I'm sure.
Yep. And they're going so good that maybe they will try to pave this year, and nobody knows that yet, but that's just a rumor.
You just created a rumor, if nothing else.
Yeah.
And the Sherwood Road is also being worked on too at the same time. So
The realignment down at the entrance. Yeah.
Correct.
And I may mention that the Port Road scour and repave in preparatory for slurry seal later this year. The first phase has been completed. Now that's with SB1 funds.
And that's the road out to the port at Point Arena?
From downtown to the port.
Any alley projects or road projects in Fort Bragg?
We spent all our money. We're letting it build up.
Okay. All right, well, then we're adjourned.